Hello everyone, and today we're going to tell you about a film where a doctor uses a special treatment called A Dangerous Method from 2011. The film begins by showing a young woman accompanied by an officer as she is being transported to a clinic. There she will be treated by Dr. Jung. But here's the problem. Sabina is convinced that she isn't ill, so the doctor suggests he will examine her every day and then they'll be done. He will sit behind her and under no circumstances is she allowed to turn around. She also needs to understand what is causing her nervous breakdowns. Sabina is convinced that it's because of some kind of humiliation which triggers her episodes, after which she suddenly falls silent. The doctor notices this and asks what she was thinking about, but Sabina doesn't know. Then Jung asks a few leading questions and finds out that it's the image of her father's hand. A little later, over lunch, he tells his wife that he plans to use an experimental method that no one has tried before, and continues the treatment, during which he adds that he will have to leave, which irritates Sabina even more. Jung simply picks up the cloak and shakes it off, triggering another episode. Upon returning to the clinic, Sabina decides to play with her food, which is noticed by the nurse, who reports everything to Professor Blackmore. However, when he entered the ward, Sabina had disappeared somewhere, but she was quickly found in a nearby pond. The nurses immediately drag Sabina away to clean her up from the dirt. A couple more days pass. Jung returns to the clinic and he already knows what happened. According to the clinic's rules, patients must help the staff in some way, and Jung suggests that she become his assistant. And since Sabina loves medicine, this makes her very happy. They already performed their first treatment today. Jung asks questions, and Sabina follows a bright spot. One way or another, their treatment must continue, provoking another episode because of stories about all sorts of things. 2 years later, Vienna. The family visits Professor Freud, with whom they discuss the results of psychoanalysis, the key topic of which is all sorts of things, including Sabina's, whose thoughts were the most astonishing. Freud suggests that this is a Russian trait. He also mentions that their research is not particularly liked by the other medical community, and even 100 years from now, their methods will be rejected. The next day, Jung says that the meeting with Freud was wonderful. But one must be more careful. Every word he says literally suppresses the ideas of his interlocutors. All his followers are completely faceless. And upon returning to the clinic, they continue to discuss all sorts of things, still unaware that Freud has sent a special guest to their clinic, whose task is to do everything possible to hinder his research. Thus, Otto begins to plant various ideas in Jung's mind, such as those concerning female patients based on his own research. And the very next day, Sabina decides to kiss Jung, along with giving him her address. Otto immediately starts pushing his idea even more forcefully. All these conversations lead him to think that Otto might actually be able to convince him of new principles. I'm afraid he might succeed in convincing me, for example, on the issue of monogamy. Otto, on the other hand, decides to run away from the clinic, leaving behind a farewell letter, after which Jung breaks his own principles and the next day resumes his usual life, where his wife has prepared a gift for him, a yacht with scarlet sails. Because of this, Jung visits Sabina to break things off. But things take a different turn. Freud also apologizes for having sent Otto to him. On top of that, he reminds him that they should only work within one field. Any research into telekinesis is unacceptable. Suddenly, a shelf cracks, and Jung states that at that very moment he had a stomachache, which means it was a phenomenon of catalytic exteriorization. His solar plexus heats up, and he is certain that everything will happen again in a minute, when suddenly there is another crack. But Freud asks him to understand that this is simply nonsense. That doesn't stop him from performing another treatment upon returning home. A new day begins. Jung and Freud decide to go for a boat ride, where Freud hints that there are rumors in Vienna about Jung and Sabina, but Jung denies everything. He tells all this to Sabina herself, which means he will have to leave since now he himself is ill. At lunch, his wife reveals that she was the one sending the anonymous letters. Jung immediately summons Sabina, since her mother received an anonymous letter in which he promised that he would only see Sabina within the walls of this office, receiving a cut. That same evening, Sabina writes a letter to Freud himself. He also writes to Jung, asking him to explain whether what is written in this letter is true. Jung assures him that the kindness he showed Sabina has turned into revenge, and he would be glad if Freud took his side. A couple of days later, Freud writes directly to Sabina, assuring her that his colleague is incapable of such actions, and asks her to forget the doctor, which upsets Sabina. But this does not stop her from visiting the doctor again, since Jung has decided to leave the medical field entirely. But Sabina wants only one thing, for Jung to write to Freud once more and tell him the whole truth because she wants to become his patient. 3 days later, Freud receives another letter with all the confessions, but in any case, they set off for America together. Late at night, Jung talks about a dream he had, where during a luggage inspection, he noticed a man in an old imperial uniform. But here's the problem, another passenger told him there was no one there. Perhaps he saw a ghost. This can mean only one thing. His dream is somehow connected to both of them. For example, in the past they used to exchange ideas without any doubts, but now everything is completely different. After that, Freud himself says that he also had a dream, but he won't share it so as not to undermine his authority. After some time, the ship arrives in America, and while Jung is convinced that their future awaits them here, Freud, on the contrary, feels as if they have brought the plague with them. Switzerland, September 25th, 1910. Sabina comes to Jung because she has prepared a dissertation on a topic that Jung needs. He also adds that when he left the clinic, he thought everything would be behind him, but now he is overwhelmed with clients, but he will manage to find time for her dissertation. However, Sabina wants only one thing: to work together. Jung fully understands that this is a huge risk, but he is confident that they will be able to handle it, roughly next Tuesday at the same time. On that day, they discuss all sorts of topics and the various assumptions stemming from them, which completely undermine Freud's theory, along with subsequent practices. After some time, Sabina finishes her studies and receives her diploma. All that's left is to decide where she wants to go. But during this time, Jung has completely changed and asks her not to leave. 2 years later. Vienna, April 17, 1912. Freud discusses Sabina's work, which is gaining traction in all the communities. And even Freud himself is beginning to suspect that her work is not without merit. However, he is shocked by the mention of Christ at the end of her work, as this is outside the realm of medicine. It was precisely because of this that Professor Jung could not become his successor. After all, how can one be a doctor when one's mind is filled with cheap mysticism? But in his eyes, he died after the lie about Sabina, and for Freud, the matter with her is simply an offer to take on some of his patients. A few days later, a business meeting begins, during which Freud starts to feel extremely unwell. That same evening, Jung sends a letter in which he writes everything he thinks about him, as if Freud had decided to play God. And Freud immediately sends a reply, in which he denies everything, thus ending their so-called friendship. July 16, 1913. Sabina visits the Jung family. By this time, Jung has completely withdrawn into himself and is not seeing any new visitors, which is why Emma asks Sabina to help him. In a personal meeting, Jung assures her that Freud's methods are a dead end. A way out must be found, one where the patient can discover themselves. Otto died of starvation in Berlin in 1919. Freud was exiled by the Germans and died of cancer in 1939. Sabina returned to Russia to teach medicine, but in 1941 she passed away. This is where the film ends, and we are very interested to know how you rate this film. Just write to us about it in the comments or simply recommend something interesting. We'll see you again very soon. Bye.